The first time my daughter-in-law thanked me for the house, I smiled because I thought she meant the roof over her head, not the deed beneath our feet. It was said so softly, too, like gratitude usually is. We were standing in my kitchen, the late afternoon sun slanting through the lace curtains I'd hung years ago, turning dust into glitter. She set her teacup down with both hands, looked at me with those careful eyes of hers, and said, "Thank you again, Mama. We're so blessed you gave us this home." My hand froze around the dish towel. The kettle clicked off behind me, the sudden silence loud enough to feel. I remember thinking, gave is a strange word to use, but I laughed it off. I always did. I had raised my son to be good with words. Maybe she picked it up from him. I didn't know then that the ground beneath my feet was already gone. Before all this, my life was simple in the way quiet mornings are simple, predictable, earned. I was 62 and still waking before the sun, still making my own coffee the old-fashioned way because I liked the sound of the percolator humming like a patient friend. My house, the house, wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a porch that sagged just enough to complain when you stepped wrong. But it was mine, bought with overtime pay and careful saving and the stubborn belief that a woman should always have something no one can take from her. I raised my son, Daniel, here, his height still marked in pencil on the doorframe, his teenage temper long since sanded smooth by time. When he married Layla 3 years ago, I was happy in that cautious way mothers get when they love deeply but have learned to brace. Layla was polite, always polite. She had a soft voice and a habit of smoothing her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. She called me Mama from the beginning, which warmed me even when it felt a little too quick. I told myself not to be suspicious of kindness. Life had taught me that suspicion can harden you into someone you don't recognize. When they fell on hard times, Daniel's company downsizing, Layla pregnant and unable to work as much, I didn't hesitate. "Stay here," I said. "Save your money. This house has room." Daniel hugged me too tight. Layla cried into my shoulder, her tears warmed through my blouse. We were family. That was what families did. The first few months were peaceful, crowded but peaceful. The smell of Layla's cooking filled the evenings, garlic and onions and spices I had to ask the names of. I liked hearing Daniel's footsteps in the hall again, the low murmur of their voices late at night. I told myself I didn't mind sleeping on the smaller bed so they could have the bigger room. I told myself I didn't mind because love makes space. It was only later that little things began to itch. Daniel started taking phone calls outside, not secretive exactly, just distant. He spoke in low tones, his back turned. When I asked who it was, he said, "Work stuff, Ma," too quickly, like the answer had been waiting at the door. Layla rearranged the living room one afternoon while I was out. Nothing drastic, just the couch angled differently, my old armchair pushed closer to the window. "It opens the space," she said brightly. I nodded, even though my chest tightened at seeing my favorite chair moved without asking. I told myself I was being silly. Young people see space differently. Mail started arriving addressed to Daniel and Layla, not unusual, but with words that made me squint. Statement, notice. One envelope had a bank logo I didn't recognize. I placed them neatly on the hall table and reminded myself that privacy is a form of respect. Still, at night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe, feeling like a guest in my own walls. The day she thanked me, I decided to cook a proper dinner, a small celebration. Layla was past her first trimester, glowing in that tired, beautiful way pregnant women do. Daniel had come home smiling, too wide, too rehearsed. I noticed these things the way mothers always do, quietly, storing them away without names. We sat around the table I'd refinished myself years ago, the surface worn smooth by elbows and time. Layla reached for my hand after dessert, her fingers cool and light. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said. "Daniel says you've always been generous." I laughed, waved it off. "This is your home for now," I said. The words tasted important, deliberate. Daniel's fork scraped his plate. Just once. He didn't look at me. Later that evening, when the dishes were done and Layla had gone to lie down, Daniel lingered in the doorway. "You okay, Ma?" he asked. I studied his face, the familiar slope of his nose, the crease between his brows that deepened when he lied as a boy. "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't I be?" He smiled, relieved too quickly, and kissed my cheek. His beard scratched my skin. "Good," he said. "Just good." That night, sleep wouldn't come. The house felt different, not hostile, just altered, like a room after the furniture has been moved and your body doesn't yet know where to rest. I got up and padded to the kitchen for water. On the counter lay an envelope I hadn't noticed before. Thick, cream-colored, my name typed neatly on the front. Inside were copies, documents, legal language that made my eyes blur until one phrase punched through the fog. Transfer of ownership. I sat down hard in the chair Layla had moved, my heart beating so loud I was sure it would wake the house. The paper trembled in my hands. I told myself there must be a mistake. There are always mistakes. That's what I told myself. I folded the papers carefully, like you do when something is fragile, and placed them back in the envelope. Morning would explain everything. It always did. Or so I thought. Morning did not explain anything. It only made everything sharper. I woke before my alarm, the sky still bruised blue, the house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. For a few seconds, I forgot about the envelope. That's how the mind protects itself, by offering you mercy before memory comes rushing back. Then I saw it. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, neat and patient, like it knew it had nowhere else to go. I poured my coffee with shaking hands, didn't add sugar the way I usually did. The first sip tasted bitter and wrong. Daniel came in while I was standing there, staring at nothing. He wore his work jacket, keys already in his hand. He looked surprised to see me awake. "Morning, Ma," he said, cheerful, practiced. "You're up early." I nodded. My voice felt far away. Couldn't sleep. He reached for the coffee pot, then stopped. His eyes followed mine to the envelope. Something flickered across his face, so quick it might have been imagined. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. Either way, my stomach tightened. "What's that?" he asked. I picked it up and slid it across the counter toward him, slowly, giving him time. "You tell me." He didn't open it. He didn't have to. His jaw clenched, just once. I waited for him to laugh, to say there'd been a mistake, to say, "Ma, of course not." Instead, he sighed. The kind of sigh you use when you're tired of pretending. "We were going to tell you," he said. The room felt smaller. The walls leaned in like they were listening. "Tell me what, Daniel?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "It's just paperwork," he said. "Nothing changes. You still live here." I laughed then, a short, sharp sound that didn't belong to me. "Paperwork doesn't move without reason," I said. "What did you sign?" He finally looked at me, really looked. "We needed collateral," he said quietly. "The bank wouldn't approve the loan otherwise." "What loan?" "For the business, for the baby, for our future." His voice rose on that last word, defensive. "I knew you'd say no." There it was, clean and ugly. "So you decided for me," I said. "You weren't using the equity," he snapped. "It was just sitting there." I stared at my son, this man I had rocked to sleep, this boy who used to bring me dandelions like they were treasure, and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. "Whose name is on the deed?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough. "Mine," he said, "and Layla's." The coffee pot clicked again, reheating nothing. I reached out and steadied myself on the counter. "You sold my house." "He refinanced it," he said quickly. "It's different." "Different how?" "We didn't sell," he said, "but technically—" "Technically?" I repeated. The word tasted like metal. "Did you ask me?" Silence. Layla appeared in the doorway then, one hand resting on her belly, eyes darting between us. "What's going on?" she asked softly. Daniel turned to her. "Ma saw the papers." Her face fell. Not shocked, not confused, just careful. She stepped closer. "We thought you understood," she said. "Daniel said you agreed." I looked at her, really looked. The smooth hair, the gentle voice, the way she never quite met my eyes anymore. "I agree to let you stay. I did not agree to give me my home." Her hand tightened over her stomach. "We're family," she said. "This is for the baby." "And where am I supposed to go?" Daniel threw his hands up. "You're not going anywhere. Why are you making this dramatic?" The word hit harder than I expected. I didn't answer. I picked up the envelope, walked past them both, and closed myself into my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, the familiar creak grounding me, and finally let my hand shake. I thought about my late husband, about how he'd always said, "Put it in writing, Martha. Love doesn't stop people from being people." I thought about every overtime shift, every dollar folded and saved. I thought about how easily trust had been mistaken for permission. For days after that, the house became quiet in a different way. Daniel avoided me. Layla spoke kindly but distantly, as though kindness could smooth over theft. They talked about paint colors and nursery furniture, like the walls hadn't shifted. I made calls. At first, I hoped it was all a misunderstanding. Banks misfile things, sons misspeak. But the lawyer I met with, a woman my age with sharp eyes and no patience for excuses, confirmed what I already knew in my bones. "They transferred ownership using a power of attorney. Did you sign one?" I shook my head. She frowned. "Then we have a problem for them." My heart pounded. "Can I get my house back?" She leaned back, studying me. "It won't be easy, and it won't be quiet." I thought of Daniel's face, Layla's soft voice, the baby coming. My chest ached with something like grief. "I don't want to hurt anyone," I said. She nodded. "Standing up for yourself isn't cruelty, it's clarity." When I got home, Layla was hanging curtains in the living room, new ones, expensive looking. She smiled when she saw me. "Aren't they lovely?" I sat down in my old armchair, the one she'd moved, and folded my hands in my lap. "We need to talk," I said. Daniel came in from the back room, sensing it. I looked at them both. "You took something that wasn't yours. I'm giving you a chance to make it right." Daniel scoffed. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm reacting." Layla's face faded. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. I met her eyes. "I'm going to tell the truth." The house was very quiet after that. Telling the truth has a sound to it. It's not loud, not at first. It's more like the steady drip of a faucet you can't ignore once you notice it. Every word I spoke after that felt heavy, deliberate, as if it might break something just by being said out loud. I didn't tell everyone at once. I told one person. My sister, Elaine. She came over that afternoon with a bag of oranges and worry already written across her face. She'd noticed something in my voice on the phone, the way I paused too long between sentences. We sat at the kitchen table where we'd shared secrets since we were girls, the surface scarred with old knife marks and memories. I slid the copies of the documents across to her the same way I had with Daniel. She read slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "They stole your house," she said flatly. I flinched. Hearing it said so plainly felt like a slap. "They're family," I whispered, as if that mattered. Elaine looked at me over her glasses. "So were we," she said, "and you wouldn't do this to me." That night, I slept at Elaine's place. It was the first time I'd ever left my own house without knowing when I'd return. I lay in her guest bed, listening to unfamiliar pipes knock in the walls, my chest aching with a grief that surprised me. Not for the house, but for the boy I thought I knew. The next morning, I met the lawyer again. We filed paperwork. Official things, things that moved forward whether my heart was ready or not. When I returned home that afternoon, Daniel was waiting. He stood in the living room with his arms crossed, like a teenager caught sneaking back in late. Layla sat on the couch, eyes red, hands clenched together. "What did you do?" Daniel demanded. I set my purse down carefully. "I protected myself," I said. "You went behind our backs," he snapped. I laughed then, softly, sadly. "Listen to yourself." Layla stood up. "You're going to ruin us," she said. "We trusted you." The word trusted felt like mockery. "You used my name, you forged my consent, you put me at risk, and you did it while calling me family." Daniel's voice dropped. "You always said this house would be mine one day." "Yes," I said, "one day, after I was gone, not while I was still sleeping in it." He looked away. For a moment, none of us spoke. The ticking clock on the wall filled the space, marking time that had suddenly become precious. "I want you to move out," I said finally. Layla gasped. "I'm pregnant." "I know, and I'm still asking." Daniel's eyes flashed. "You can't do that." "I can, and I will." The lawyer helped me serve the notice. I didn't watch when Daniel read it. I couldn't. Some things are too much like funerals. Word spread faster than I expected. Families talk, churches talk, neighbors notice when moving boxes appear. My niece called first, then an old friend. Questions wrapped in concern, curiosity disguised as sympathy. I didn't lie. I didn't embellish. I told the truth the way it was, simple, unadorned. They took my house without asking. People reacted the way people do when betrayal wears a familiar face. Some were shocked, some were quiet. A few, too few, said things like, "I'm sure they had their reasons." Daniel stopped coming by. Layla left a note one morning on the counter, her handwriting neat and careful. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought this was what families do." I folded the note and put it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to answer it. The court process took months, long, grinding months where nothing seemed to happen and everything felt like it was falling apart. I learned new words: fraud, misrepresentation. I learned how it feels to sit in a waiting room with strangers who are all carrying their own private disasters. Daniel didn't look at me in court. Layla cried quietly, a tissue pressed to her mouth. I felt no triumph, only a dull ache and the strange calm of someone who has already lost something important. The judge ruled in my favor. The deed was returned, the loan nullified, the bank apologized. Daniel was fined. There were consequences, real ones, but no handcuffs, no shouting. Justice, when it comes, is often quieter than we imagine. When it was over, I went back to my house alone. The rooms felt hollow, their furniture was gone. So were the new curtains. The walls bore faint marks where pictures had hung. I opened the windows and let the air move through, carrying the smells of dust and old paint and something like relief. That evening, Daniel called. "I didn't think you'd go through with it." "I didn't think you'd make me." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. "So am I." We hung up without resolving anything. Sometimes apology is a beginning.
Sometimes it's just an acknowledgement of the wreckage. I slept in my own bed that night, the familiar creak a comfort. The house breathed again, slower now. I knew then that the hardest part wasn't over. Justice restores property. Healing takes longer. After the court case, everyone seemed to expect me to feel victorious. They brought casseroles and quiet congratulations, spoke in hushed tones like I'd survived something unspeakable. "You're so strong," they said. "I don't know how you did it." I nodded. I thanked them. I smiled when it was expected. But strength, I learned, doesn't feel like power. It feels like exhaustion. The house was mine again, legally and completely, yet it no longer felt the same. Every room carried echoes. Daniel's laughter from years ago, Layla humming while she cooked, the soft thud of footsteps that no longer came. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. I began sorting through what they'd left behind, a forgotten sweater in the closet, a cracked mug shoved to the back of the cabinet, small things that shouldn't have mattered, but did. Each item felt like proof that love had lived here and had been mishandled. One afternoon, while I was scrubbing the kitchen floor on my hands and knees, something about cleaning low to the ground makes grief quieter. I heard a knock. It was Layla. She stood on the porch with a box in her arms and circles under her eyes that made her look younger, almost fragile. Her belly had grown. She looked like a woman carrying too much, inside and out. "I just wanted to return these," she said, holding out the box. "They're yours." I took it. Our fingers brushed. She flinched. "I didn't know," she said quickly, "about the power of attorney. Daniel handled everything." I studied her face. She wasn't lying, not entirely, but she hadn't asked either. "You should have asked," I said softly. She nodded, tears welling. I thought love meant not questioning." I sighed. Love without questions can still be dangerous. She swallowed. "We're staying with my sister now. Daniel's been different, quieter." "I hope he's learning," I said. She hesitated, then asked, "Do you hate me?" The question surprised me. I considered it honestly. "No," I said, "but I don't trust you." She accepted that with a small nod. "That's fair." She left without asking for forgiveness. I respected her more for that. Weeks passed, then months. The baby was born, a boy. Elaine told me, careful and gentle, as though the news itself might bruise me. I sent a card, nothing more, nothing less. People asked if I regretted it, if I'd do things differently if I could go back. I told them the truth. I regret that it came to this. I don't regret protecting myself. In the quiet that followed, I found new routines. I planted tomatoes in the backyard. I repainted the living room a soft green I'd always loved but never chosen because someone else preferred beige. I took long walks in the evening, learning the rhythm of my own steps again. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced. He looked thinner, older. The confidence he'd worn like armor had been set aside. "He just wanted to see you," he said. I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where everything had come apart. He stared at his hands. He messed up. He thought I was doing what I had to do. "You did what was easy for you," I said. He nodded. "He forgot you were a person, not just my mother." The admission settled between us like dust finally finding a surface. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. I met his eyes. "You don't fix it. You live with it, and you do better." He cried then, quietly. I didn't touch him. Some distances have to be respected. When he left, I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. the kind that doesn't excuse but explains. Time kept moving. It always does. The house filled with different sounds, music I liked, silence when I needed it. I hosted Elaine for dinner, laughed more than I expected to. I started volunteering at the community center, teaching budgeting classes to young women who reminded me of myself years ago. I told them, always know what's in your name. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls gold, I sat on the porch and watched the street settle. Children laughed, a dog barked, somewhere a door slammed. This house had been many things to me: shelter, battleground, sanctuary. It taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Love should never require you to disappear. I breathed that in and let it stay.
As summer folded into fall, the house began to feel like mine again, not in a legal sense, but in a living one. I noticed it one morning while making coffee. The percolator hummed, steady and familiar, and for the first time in months, my chest didn't tighten at the sound. I stood barefoot on the cool tile, sunlight warming one shoulder, and realized I wasn't bracing myself anymore. That was new. Healing, I learned, doesn't arrive with ceremony. It slips in quietly when you're busy living. Daniel kept his distance after that visit. He called once every few weeks, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to talk about the baby. I listened more than I spoke. When he asked how I was, I told him the truth, but only the parts that were mine to share. "I'm learning," I said once, "about myself." He was quiet on the other end. "I'm trying to, too," he said. I hoped he meant it. Layla never came back to the house. I didn't expect her to. But one afternoon, a small package arrived in the mail. Inside was a framed photo, Daniel as a boy, missing 2 front teeth, standing in this very yard with a water hose in his hand. On the back, she'd written, "He loved you before he knew how to love anyone else." I sat with that for a long time. There were days I still felt the sting. Certain memories could catch me off guard. The sound of Daniel's laugh in a grocery store aisle, a pregnant woman adjusting her coat on the bus. Grief doesn't move in straight lines. It circles back when you least expect it. But I was no longer drowning in it. One afternoon, Elaine came over with a pie and a determined look. "You need to start living again," she said, setting it on the counter like a command. "I am living," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "You're surviving. There's a difference." So I said yes more often. Yes to dinner invitations. Yes to weekend trips. Yes to things that felt indulgent simply because they were chosen. I even hosted Thanksgiving. That surprised everyone, including me. The table was smaller this time. Elaine and her husband, a neighbor from down the street, 2 women from the community center. The chairs didn't all match. The food wasn't perfect, but the laughter was real. After everyone left, I stood alone in the dining room, touching the back of each chair as I stacked them away. The room felt full, even in the quiet. That night, Daniel called. "I heard you hosted," he said carefully. "I did," I said. "I'm glad," he said, and then, after a pause, "Would you ever consider meeting your grandson?" The question hung between us, heavy and fragile. I closed my eyes. "I'm not ready," I said, "but I will be." He exhaled, relief softening his voice. "Thank you for being honest." Honesty had cost us dearly, but it was also the only thing that felt solid now. Winter came early that year. I spent long evenings by the window watching frost gather on the glass, reflecting on the choices that had shaped me. I thought about how often women are taught to give without asking, to trust without proof, to confuse love with sacrifice. I thought about how easily that lesson can be used against us. One night, as I was locking up before bed, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My hair had more gray than before. My eyes looked tired, but steady. I looked like a woman who had survived something and refused to be ashamed of it. The following spring, Daniel asked again if I'd meet the baby. This time, I said yes. We met at a park halfway between our homes, neutral ground. He arrived first, pacing near a bench. When I stepped out of my car, he turned and smiled, tentative, hopeful. Layla stood a few feet away, rocking the stroller gently. She looked at me and nodded. The baby slept through the entire introduction, blissfully unaware of the complicated love waiting for him. I stood there, hands clasped, heart pounding. "He's beautiful," I said. Daniel's eyes filled. "He is." I didn't hold him that day. I wasn't ready for that, but I stayed. We talked about weather and work and small, safe things. When I left, Daniel hugged me lightly, respectfully. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for understanding," I replied. Driving home, I felt something close to peace, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that makes room for the future. The house greeted me with its familiar creak and sigh. I set my purse down, ran my hand along the wall, and whispered, "We're okay." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles after everything loud has already happened. It's not empty, it's thoughtful, like the house itself is finally done asking questions. Spring moved gently that year. The dogwood out front bloomed without asking permission, white petals drifting onto the porch like small apologies from the world. I spent more time outside, pruning the rose bush I'd neglected, fanning the porch railing where paint had peeled. Working with my hands helped me stay in my body instead of my head. One afternoon, as I was kneeling in the yard, a neighbor I barely knew stopped by the fence. "You look lighter," she said, "like something heavy finally set you down." I smiled, surprised by how seen I felt. "I finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine," I replied. That became something of a rule for me. I stopped explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding. I stopped softening my story to make it easier to swallow. When someone asked what happened with my son, I said, "We went through something hard and we're rebuilding carefully." That was the truth, nothing more, nothing less. Daniel and I found a rhythm that didn't rush forgiveness. We met occasionally for coffee. Sometimes he brought pictures of the baby. Sometimes we talked about ordinary things, traffic, work, how tired he was learning how to be a father. I listened without fixing. He learned, slowly, to sit with discomfort instead of covering it with confidence. One day, he said something that stayed with me. "I didn't realize how much I took you for granted," he said, staring into his cup. "You were always just there." I nodded. "That's what love looks like when it's invisible," I said, "and that's why it's dangerous." He didn't argue. Layla remained polite and distant. That was fine. Not every relationship is meant to be repaired fully. Some are meant to be understood and left alone. I thought often about the moment she'd thanked me for the house, how small it had seemed, how easy it would have been to ignore that itch in my chest. Women are taught to override that feeling, to smile through discomfort, to call it generosity. But intuition is not paranoia, it's memory speaking. The lawyer I worked with invited me to speak at a small seminar for older women about protecting assets and boundaries. I stood at the front of the room, palms sweating, and told my story without names or bitterness. I loved my son, and I still do, but love doesn't mean surrendering your voice, your name, or your future. Women nodded. Some cried. One woman squeezed my hand afterward and whispered, "I needed to hear that." So did I. On the anniversary of the court ruling, I did something symbolic. I took the deed, now safely returned, and placed it in a small fireproof box. Then I framed a photo of the house instead. Not the building itself, but the front porch in late afternoon light. Ownership isn't just paper, it's presence. That evening, Daniel called. He said, "We're having a small birthday gathering for the baby. No pressure, just wanted you to know you're welcome." I looked around my living room, the soft green walls, the lamp I finally bought because I liked it, the quiet that no longer felt lonely. "I'll come," I said, "for a little while." When I arrived, the baby was awake this time. His eyes were wide and curious, his tiny fist clutching the air like he was already reaching for something important. Layla asked, gently, "Would you like to hold him?" I hesitated, then I nodded. He was heavier than I expected, solid, warm. He settled against me like he recognized safety without knowing why. Something in my chest loosened, not with pain, but with continuity. I wasn't replaced. I wasn't erased. I was still here. When I handed him back, I felt no fear of losing him. Love doesn't need ownership to exist. Driving home that night, I realized something quietly profound. The house had never really been the point. The point was consent, respect, being seen as a full human being, not a resource. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. The porch light cast a familiar glow, the same one that had guided me home for decades. I thought about all the women who had given too much because they were told that's what love required. It doesn't. Love that costs you your dignity is not love, it's leverage. Inside, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark listening to the house settle. It sounded like an exhale. I slept deeply that night. If you've listened this far, I want to ask you something, gently, honestly. If someone you loved crossed a line you never agreed to, would you protect the relationship or would you protect yourself? Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look kind in the moment. Sometimes it looks lonely, but in the end, it leaves you with something precious. Your name, your voice, your home. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts below. I read every comment. And if you're carrying a decision that feels heavy right now, know this: you're allowed to choose yourself. Until next time, take care of your heart and your keys. In the weeks after I told my story at that seminar, something unexpected happened. Letters began to arrive. Not emails, not comments on a screen. Actual envelopes, addressed in careful handwriting, some shaky, some bold. Women I didn't know, women who had been listening quietly their whole lives, found my name through the community center and decided to trust me with theirs. They wrote about sons who borrowed money that never came back, about daughters-in-law who slowly took over piece by piece, about husbands who signed things while they were sick, tired, grieving, about the shame they carried for not seeing it sooner. I sat at my kitchen table each evening, opening one letter at a time, the smell of paper and ink grounding me. I didn't rush. Every story deserved to be read slowly. One woman wrote, "I thought love meant letting go. Now I see I let go of myself." Another said, "I'm afraid if I speak up, I'll lose my family." I wrote back when I could, not with advice, just truth. "Speaking up doesn't guarantee you'll keep them," I wrote, "but staying silent guarantees you'll lose yourself." Those letters changed something in me. They stitched my experience into something larger, something shared. Pain becomes lighter when it's no longer isolated. Daniel noticed the change too. "You seem steadier," he said one afternoon when we met for coffee. "I am," I replied. "I stopped needing approval." He nodded, stirring his drink. "I wish I'd learned that earlier." "So do most people," I said gently. "That's why it matters when we do learn it. He looked at me then, not as his safety net, not as his fallback, but as a woman with her own gravity. It was new. It was overdue. As the baby grew, my role shifted naturally. I wasn't the always available grandmother, and I wasn't absent either. I showed up when invited. I left when it was time. I held him sometimes. Other times, I simply watched. Boundaries didn't make love smaller, they made it clearer. One afternoon, Layla and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen while Daniel put the baby down for a nap. The silence was thick, but not hostile. She said, "I want to say something, not to fix anything, just to say it." I waited. I grew up watching my mother give everything away, her money, her time, her opinions. I thought that's what strength looked like. I nodded. So did I. She swallowed. "I didn't understand what we were taking from you. Not really. I'm trying to understand now." I believed her. Understanding doesn't undo harm, but it can stop it from repeating. "Learn it early," I said. "It saves a lot of grief." She smiled faintly. "I hope so." Life settled into something gentle after that. Not perfect, gentle. I repainted the porch railing a brighter white. I replaced the old doorbell. I hosted book club on Thursdays. I laughed loudly again without checking who might hear. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about how close I came to losing everything without realizing it, how easily it could have gone another way if I'd stayed quiet, if I'd told myself it's not worth the trouble. But trouble is often the doorway to truth. I keep my important papers in order now, not because I live in fear, but because I live in clarity. I teach other women to do the same, not with suspicion, with respect for themselves. On the wall by my front door hangs a small sign Elaine gave me. It reads, "Nothing given under pressure is a gift." I see it every time I leave the house, and every time I return. So if you're listening to this and something in your life feels off, a conversation you keep replaying, a document you don't quite understand, a thank you that doesn't sit right in your chest, pause, pay attention. You don't owe anyone access to your life simply because they share your blood. You don't owe silence to keep the peace, and you don't owe sacrifice when respect is missing. Love should feel like warmth, not erosion. If my story stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Sit with it. Talk about it. Write it down. Ask the hard questions while you still can. And if you've already walked this road, if you stood up late but stood up anyway, know this: it wasn't too late. It was right on time. Thank you for listening to me. And more importantly, thank you for listening to yourself. There are moments, long after a storm has passed, when you realize the wind changed you more than the wreckage ever did. For me, it came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was standing in line at the grocery store watching a woman a few steps ahead of me argue gently with the cashier. She couldn't find her wallet. Her hands trembled as she searched her bag, apologizing over and over even though no one was angry with her. When she finally stepped aside to let others pass, I saw the relief on her face mixed with something else. Embarrassment, maybe, or the old habit of shrinking. I paid for her groceries without thinking. When I handed her the receipt, she cried. Not loudly, just a quiet release, like something had finally been allowed to soften. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't want to ask." I nodded. Most of us don't. On the drive home, I thought about how many women are taught that asking is weakness, that taking up space is rude, that protecting yourself is selfish. I thought about how close I came to believing that too. The house greeted me with its familiar creak as I opened the door. I set the groceries down and paused in the entryway, letting the quiet wrap around me. It felt earned now. I walked through each room slowly, not out of fear, but out of appreciation. The living room where I'd learned how betrayal can wear a smile. The kitchen where truth finally spoke up. the bedroom where I cried alone and later slept in peace. This house had witnessed my unlearning. I brewed tea and sat at the table with one of the letters I hadn't answered yet. The woman wrote that her son wanted her to sign papers just in case, that she felt silly being nervous. I took a deep breath and wrote back, "If it makes your stomach tighten, it deserves your attention. Love doesn't rush you. Love explains." When I sealed the envelope, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't known before all this happened. Pain, when it's survived honestly, becomes a map, and maps are meant to be shared. That evening, Daniel called. "Ma," he said, "I wanted to tell you something." I listened. "I finally told Layla no," he said, "about something small, but I said no, and it felt right." I smiled. "That's how it starts." He chuckled softly. "I think I understand you a little better now." "That's all I ever wanted," I said. After we hung up, I sat with that moment, not because it fixed the past, but because it hinted at a future where patterns could end instead of repeat. Later that week, I stood in my backyard watching the sun dip low, painting the sky in colors that never ask permission to exist. I thought about how often women wait to be allowed, allowed to speak, allowed to rest, allowed to keep what is theirs. No one handed me permission. I had to take it. And that, I think, is the part we don't talk about enough. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving others. It means you stop disappearing for them. I still love my son, I always will, but I love myself now in a way that doesn't flinch when love is tested. I lock my door at night without guilt. I read contracts before signing. I ask questions even when my voice shakes, and I sleep peacefully because of it. So if you're listening to this while sitting in your car, or folding laundry, or lying awake beside someone who doesn't see you anymore, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not difficult for wanting clarity. You are not unkind for setting limits. You are not wrong for protecting what you worked for. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop explaining herself. If my story reached you, hold on to whatever part of it felt familiar. That feeling is information, and you deserve to trust it. I'll leave you with this, something I wish someone had told me years ago. If someone thanks you for something you never agreed to give, pause. That pause might save you everything. Would you have done what I did, or would you have stayed quieter a little longer? Tell me your thoughts. I'm listening. And wherever you are tonight, lock your doors gently, hold your name with pride, and remember, what's yours is not up for negotiation. After I shared my story publicly, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, or the court, or even the silence that followed. The hardest part was learning how to live after, without constantly checking over my shoulder, without replaying conversations, without wondering what else I might have missed. Healing asks you to stay present in a world that already taught you to be careful. Some nights, I'd wake up convinced I'd forgotten something, a document, a signature, a loose end that could unravel everything again. I'd get out of bed, heart racing, and walk through the house with the lights off, touching walls, doors, the banister, proof that I was still here, that this place was still mine. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was memory trying to keep me alive. Over time, those nights became fewer. I started trusting the quiet instead of questioning it. One afternoon, months later, I found an old box in the closet while reorganizing. Inside were photos I hadn't seen in years. Daniel as a toddler on this very porch, my husband standing behind him with his hands on Daniel's shoulders, both of them squinting into the sun. I sat on the floor and let myself feel it all. Not the anger, not the loss, the love. Love doesn't vanish when trust breaks. It changes shape. It becomes something you hold carefully instead of something you give freely. I put the photos back, but I didn't hide them. I placed one on a bookshelf in the living room, not as a reminder of what went wrong, but of what was once right. That distinction matters. Daniel and I continued rebuilding slowly. We never pretended nothing happened. We spoke honestly when it was uncomfortable, and we stopped conversations when they became too much. That alone changed everything. One day he said something that told me growth had taken root. "I don't want my son to think love means taking," he said. "I want him to see it as something you protect." I looked at him then, not as the boy I raised, but as a man choosing differently. "Then show him," I said, "every day." Layla began asking questions too, practical ones about finances, about boundaries, about what no really means when it's said calmly instead of angrily. I answered what I could. I let silence answer the rest. Not every lesson needs words. The community center asked me back again, this time not to tell my story, but to listen. Women gathered in a circle, sharing quietly, courage passing from one to another like a lit candle. One woman said, "I thought I was selfish for wanting my name on the deed." Another said, "I thought it was too late to speak up." I told them the truth I had learned the long way. "It's only too late when you're no longer here," I said, "and even then, your story still matters." When I came home that evening, I stood in the doorway longer than usual. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something warm, maybe memory, maybe peace. I realized I wasn't just living in this house anymore. I was living with it. It held me, but it didn't define me. That's the part I want you to understand if you stayed with me this long. This story was never just about a house. It was about consent, about visibility, about the quiet power of saying, "I didn't agree to this." Too many women are taught that love means endurance, that family means sacrifice without limits, that speaking up is the same as tearing things apart. It isn't. Sometimes speaking up is the only way to keep something from rotting quietly. If you're standing at the edge of a decision right now, one that feels heavy, complicated, tangled in love and fear, I won't tell you what to do, but I will tell you this. Pay attention to how your body reacts when you're asked to give. Pay attention to whether your voice feels welcome or merely tolerated. Pay attention to whether gratitude is being used to rush you past your own boundaries. Those signals are not weakness, they are wisdom. I didn't listen the first time my instincts spoke, but I listened when it mattered, and that made all the difference. So wherever you are tonight, maybe sitting in a room that doesn't feel like yours anymore, maybe wondering how things slipped so far without you noticing, I hope my story reminds you of this. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to ask. You are allowed to say no, even to the people you love. And if you ever find yourself being thanked for something you never agreed to give, let that be your moment to stop, to breathe, to choose yourself. Because what's built on your silence will eventually collapse, and what's built on your truth, no matter how shaky at first, can finally stand. There was a morning, nearly a year after everything unraveled, when I realized I hadn't thought about the betrayal at all. The realization came softly, without ceremony. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing blueberries in a colander, watching the water bead and run purple down the drain. Sunlight slipped through the window and rested on the counter the way it used to, uninvited, familiar, gentle. And for the first time, my chest didn't tighten. Healing doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly, like that, between ordinary moments when your mind finally trusts the day enough to wander somewhere else. I dried my hands and sat at the small table by the window. Outside, a neighbor was teaching her daughter how to ride a bike. The girl wobbled, cried, laughed, fell, and climbed back on again. I watched longer than necessary, something warm rising in my throat. We never stop learning balance. We just get better at hiding the bruises. Daniel came by later that afternoon, alone. He'd started doing that. No announcements, no rehearsed speeches, just presence. I was nearby, he said, standing in the doorway like he used to when he was younger, unsure whether to come in or turn back. You can come in, I said. You don't have to ask anymore. He nodded, taking off his shoes carefully, as if the floor itself deserved respect. We sat with coffee. There was a pause, not awkward, not heavy, just space. I talked to a counselor, he said finally, about everything. I didn't interrupt. I let him finish. They said something that stuck, that I confused loyalty with obedience and love with entitlement. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words land without rushing to soften them. That happens more than people admit, especially when no one teaches you the difference. He looked at me then, really looked. I'm trying to learn now. I know, I said, and I meant it. Forgiveness doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it comes with clarity, and sometimes clarity is enough. Layla sent a letter a few weeks later, not an apology, at least not the kind people expect, but an acknowledgement. She wrote about fear, about pressure, about how easy it had been to justify what she wanted when she convinced herself everyone else would be fine. I see now that silence isn't consent, and kindness isn't permission, she wrote. I read it twice, then folded it and placed it in the same drawer as the legal documents, not as evidence, but as closure. Some things don't need a response to be complete. Life settled into a new rhythm after that, not the old one, not the one where I assumed safety and learned the cost later. This rhythm had intention. I reviewed paperwork carefully. I asked questions even when they made people uncomfortable. I stopped apologizing for needing time to think. And something surprising happened. People adjusted. Those who stayed respected me more. Those who didn't faded. That's another quiet truth no one prepares you for. You don't lose people when you set boundaries. You lose illusions. I began volunteering again, not just at the community center, but at a local housing clinic. Women sat across from me, hands folded tight in their laps, telling stories that sounded too familiar. He says it's just paperwork. They told me it was easier this way. I didn't want to cause problems. I never told them what to do. I just asked questions. Did you read it? Did you agree? How did it feel when they explained it? Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they went quiet. Sometimes they smiled with relief, as if someone had finally given them permission to trust themselves. When I walked home from those sessions, I felt lighter, not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned how to listen without disappearing. One evening, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my shoulders, the air cool and steady. The house behind me felt solid, not just in walls and beams, but in meaning. I thought about how close I'd come to losing it. Not just the house, my voice, my authority over my own life, my belief that being kind didn't require being small. There's a moment in every story like this where people expect triumph, a sharp ending, a clear villain punished, a hero restored. Real life isn't shaped that neatly. Daniel still carries guilt. Layla still carries distance. I still carry scars. But none of us carry lies anymore. And that honesty is what finally feels like home. If I could go back and speak to the woman I was the day my daughter-in-law thanked me for a gift I never gave, I wouldn't warn her. I would sit beside her, I would take her hand, and I would say, "Pay attention." Not to the words, not to the smiles, but to the way your spirit leans back when something isn't right. That instinct is older than fear, stronger than obligation, and far more trustworthy than silence. This story doesn't end with triumph or revenge. It ends with something quieter. Ownership, not of a house, but of myself. And that is something no one can sell behind your back.